What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and in the mind of everyone else in the real estate and property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to get control of your thought processes, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are, episode 25. Last week, I was talking about fire safety and the opportunities I have come across because of fire safety issues in the past. And this week, I'm going to be speaking with Thomas O'Connell of MobiMove, which is a new bike sharing scheme here in my hometown of Dublin. And why is a real estate guy bringing up micro mobility and bike sharing on his real estate podcast? Well, funny you should ask. Bike sharing and micro mobility has come starkly into focus in recent weeks. Certainly for me and my role in East Point, because with COVID-19, habits are changing rapidly. And I believe about a half a decade of consumer behavior and attitudes and habits and stuff have changed in the last 6 months from COVID-19. And we're seeing it very noticeably with our own shuttle in the business park. Last January, we would have been transporting about 3,500 people a day. Currently, we are transporting 35 people a day. So it's a pretty dramatic fall. Like, that's a 99% fall. And a lot of people have instead decided that they're going to walk and bike because they don't want to take public transport. And this, of course, is meaning that habits are changing fast, and we as a service provider are having to react quickly. So we're starting to look at bikes and bike sharing and all that kind of stuff. So before I get into it, I thought I would just give you a quick update on where things are at. The Facebook group is currently at 233 members, and I certainly recommend that you guys join us there, the Behind the Facade community. It's a good place for us all to connect, and if you have questions, specific topics you want me to talk about here on the podcast, I'm only delighted to meet with you on the in the Facebook group. Anything else I would like to add? Yes, just reviews and things of that nature. A few of you listeners have been very good and have left some nice reviews and given some 5-star ratings for the podcast. If you have time to do that today, it would be fantastic. Just really helps with us getting the discovery through the algorithm, and every little review makes a difference. So as I said today, bike sharing and e-scooters and all of that, I'm seeing them everywhere I look these days. And as a landlord, the tenant loyalty you can create from goodwill, from providing top-notch services, that can make the difference between someone deciding to move out of your building and choosing to stay in your building. And so that is one of the reasons with our bus service in the park, now that it is so severely curtailed and the winds of change very much looking towards bike sharing and things like that, we are looking at ways we can improve our own services just to make sure that our occupiers have the best possible experience and they don't have a reason to be complaining about, a lack of services, or it may not even be the occupiers, it may be the staff who work for the occupiers. And one of the biggest things that the occupiers are trying to do is recruit and retain staff. There is a massive war for talent out there. At least there was before COVID-19. I don't imagine it's gone away. They still want to hang on to their best people. And so anything you can do to make your building or your location more attractive, easier to reach, all of that, it does make a big difference. And one of the small little things I've noticed is storage. We have a number of buildings in the park, and I speak to the tenant representatives on a regular enough basis, and they were telling me that, is there any way we can create storage for the new scooters that everyone are arriving in? Because unlike bikes, they don't want to lock them outside. I don't think you can lock a scooter very easily compared to a bike. The way they're kind of designed, there's not many points that you can actually lock a chain around without being able to slip that off easy enough. And so people tend to bring them into the building and tend to get sort of parked under their desk, which is a bit of a trip hazard, and so on and so on. So I'm hearing a lot about scooters and the storage of them. And just, I'm seeing so many bikes on the road these days. It's incredible. And it takes me back to a visit to Amsterdam I did about 5 years ago. And I visited a place called the Student Hotel. And this was back when I was very much interested in the student housing market. And I was looking at raising money with some friends of mine. We were going to do a fund that was going to be a student accommodation fund. And we wanted to have a look at the different examples out there, particularly in Europe, that are very successful. And we met the CEO and founder, Charlie McGregor, of the Student Hotel. And if you guys have not heard of it, I thoroughly recommend you go and check it out. You can check it out online, but it's just an amazing place to see, just a different take, thinking outside of the box. I'm always talking about being resourceful. Charlie and his team have built something really, really interesting in Amsterdam. And when I was in the basement of his building, and this was a former office building that they had converted into student housing, but instead of it being a typical student housing place, they actually turned it into a hotel where you can rent the room. So I could arrive as a non-student and just book a night in the hotel. So that doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a student, but it is next to a student or next to a university campus. So it was mostly students that were interested, and they could take it for a year-long lease if they wanted, and they would pay student accommodation prices, or you could take it for one night, if a visiting parent or a visiting professor would take it for a night or a week or whatever it is, and they would get accommodation rates that are kind of pretty much in that region. So very interesting way. But why am I bringing this up? Charlie took me down to his basement, and in the basement they had this whole bicycle storage area. And I'm not joking, there must have been 500 bicycles in that place. But every single one of them was branded the Student Hotel. And I'm not talking cheap, crappy bikes. These were really, really stylish looking bikes. And if you go and, in fact, I'll put a link on the in the show notes showing these bikes. They were very cool, very kind of avant-garde. And these guys would be cycling around. If you had a room in the hotel, you automatically had a key to one of these bikes, and that was the kind of service that Charlie was providing, and it was very cool. And also the fact that it was stored dry in the basement, like completely out of the rain and all that. So it was a whole different way of looking at things. And of course, Amsterdam is well known for the amount of bikes out there. And then just thought I'd add in the tip of the week that I was just going to suggest is, and if you're looking at buying a commercial property, sort of say it's going to be a convenience store or food and beverage outlet, one of the things to remember is that locations next to bus stops and things of that nature have always done better than other locations. So if you're looking to rent a shop to a convenience store or a pharmacy or whatever it is, they always do better the closer to the bus stop, because people get off the bus and the first thing they do is go in to buy their newspaper or whatever it is they're out and about to go and get, and the closest place to the bus stop is the place. Now, with the habits changing because of COVID-19, I suspect we're going to start to see that bicycles and bike parking and scooter parking and securing your scooter or your bike, all of that, and even availability of bikes and stuff, that is suddenly going to come into focus now. If people are going to be traveling less on public transport and opting to go and travel on a bike or a scooter, then these locations, like having a shop with, or a cafe or whatever, with a bike parking area at the back or conveniently at the rear, whatever it is, that could be the difference between your shop being the one that gets the most customers. If your shop is getting, if the guy you're renting to is getting more customers, he has a higher turnover. If he has a higher turnover, he can afford a higher rent. And if he can afford a higher rent, then your property has just become more valuable. So just thinking about you guys also out there, anyone who's building apartment buildings or houses or anything of that nature, bike access and storage. And today's conversation with Thomas, he actually goes into the fact that he believes that there's actually new rules going to coming out, that a bike sharing scheme must be part of your scheme. That remains to be seen, but I haven't heard of that myself yet. But I don't have my finger on the pulse the way Thomas would when it comes to micro mobility. And so anyway, just it's something to just all of this gets factored in when somebody is looking to buy a property, and they're kind of like a tenant or a consumer or whatever. All of this stuff gets factored into their decision making. Access to to a train or to a bus stop or to easy access to bicycle sharing schemes and things like that all makes it a bit easier to make that final decision. And lastly, well, anyway, look, let's just get into the conversation with Thomas. So Thomas is the founder of Moby Move, and it's a bike sharing scheme. He is the founder of the business and the CEO. And so I go into a little bit of his backstory. We're talking about his previous experience selling bicycle products and wheeled goods, as he calls it. And he gets into the struggles of the business. He gets into financing. He gets into product sourcing and all of that. And I've linked a lot of the stuff he references in the show notes before. So guys, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you now to Thomas O'Connell. Thank you. So today we're going to be speaking with Thomas O'Connell, and Thomas runs he's the founder and CEO of I was going to say a podcast. He's the founder and CEO of a company that does bike share, and it's electronic bikes, e-bikes as we call them now, and it's called Moby. And I asked Thomas to join us here today to talk about the future of micro-mobility and where he is positioning his business in the Irish market for now, but we'll talk about future expansion plans. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you.
First, I thought for a bit of context, perhaps the audience would just like a little bit of backstory. Can you tell us a little bit about your kind of upbringing and what brought you to where we are today?
Yeah, I suppose I've actually been, when I left college, I've been involved in, I call it wheeled goods, but I've been involved in wheeled goods for about 18 years now. Started out as my first business as a distributor. So I started importing, I would call it kids, new and different wheeled goods. So I was selling, a man in a van going around selling different kind of skateboards and things like that. Anything non-bike, but anything that you'd find in a bike shop that wasn't a bicycle, I would be selling it to the bike shops all around Ireland. So that was an import and distribution company. Our best product at the time was a product called the KMX cart that was quite popular way back in 2004, 5, 6. So I was basically an importer, distributor. Then after that business grew pretty rapidly actually, but then got into trouble in the recession, 2008, 2009, and had to start again with nothing from the bedroom, and actually started out by kind of taking the knowledge that we had in the distribution company, and we wanted to design and develop our own products. So we started actually selling all around the world. We developed a product called the Y bike, and got it designed, developed, and sent to China to get it manufactured, and actually started selling it all around the world. It was a kid's balance bike that evolved into a merger with the factory that owned the Flickr scooter. So we created a joint venture with them, and that company became a company called Yvolution. And we ended up, so nobody knows actually that the Flickr was it was a really famous product in Ireland. It was probably the best selling, quickest selling, and highest selling toy ever in Ireland. It took off after it was like every second kid I think had one after 2 years. So we actually went into a JV with the owner of that product and improved it and created a whole lot of other products behind it. But we actually went and sold it all around the world to Toys R Us and Walmart. We were supplier of the year to Toys R Us. It's an unknown Irish success story.
Wow.
We got about 32 feet of space in Toys R Us USA. We were supplier of the year 3 years in a row. Same in Canada, Japan. We were supplying the likes of Halfords, Argos, Tesco, all the kind of mid-mass retailers around the world with a range of kind of kids wheeled goods that we were designing and developing here in Ireland and producing in China. So it grew very, very big very quickly. And then that business kind of grew quite quickly. It was probably 2000 we started that launched in 2011, and then up to 2016. That was kind of we were kind of going, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do next? We were looking at other categories. We actually looked heavily into electric and decided we were going to launch a consumer brand. So we'd be designing and developing electric wheeled goods, scooters, bicycles, more at the end of the adult market. And actually, right at that time, I was in China and saw when the first kind of what we call dockless or stationless bike sharing businesses started launching. And I saw all these bikes. You were in Shenzhen. There was hundreds of thousands of dockless bicycles, but you could see how popular they were, and you kind of were. It was at the time that Uber was, all the hype, and I basically said to myself, this is going to be the next Uber, because it was such a convenience. There was so many bikes everywhere. You'd just walk out, you'd literally use your app and get one. But obviously there was lots of problems with that business model. There was too much money went into it, and there ended up being mountains of bikes in China that went to landfill. I was actually there at the same time. Sorry. Yeah.
I've seen some of those photographs of literally like football fit pitches filled to the brim 30 feet high with bicycles that are all being dumped.
Yeah, it was basically like it was kind of the Chinese way. I mean, they were going all at it for market share and more bicycles. The mentality was you'd get more users on your bike, and they were doing up to all kinds of tricks. They'd be scratching each other's QR codes off the bikes and moving their bikes in front of the other guy. It was kind of the Wild West. There was no regulation around it. And I was also in California, just weirdly at the same time as the first shared scooter company launched, which was Bird at the time, and they launched in what's that place called? Santa Monica, and I saw them taking off there. But yeah, I think so. What was happening around that time is like cities like Dublin and European cities were seeing these kind of venture capital fuel companies, and they were kind of half afraid and half welcoming the idea of stationless or dockless bikes. And there was this kind of like, I suppose the approach of some of these companies was raise loads of money and just go put them on the street. Doesn't matter what happens. It's about kind of scale fast and figure out profit later. Whereas Dublin and a few other cities actually took the approach of, okay, we like these things, but we don't like mountains of bikes on our streets.
Everywhere.
And actually, in a funny way, they were actually kind of way ahead of a lot of other cities, and where cities are actually moving to now was they, I would say, cleverly said, okay, we like this, but we want them to be locked to Sheffield, bike stands.
Yeah.
We wanted a slow, controlled approach. We want you to do X amount this year and X amount that year. We don't want them taking up, the pathways and the sidewalks and things like that. So Dublin is actually a very good example of dockless schemes that have actually launched well without much backlash and much of the issues of other cities. Even Paris only last year let like 10 different scooter operators into the city, and people will tell you if they've been there, they'll say it was absolute mayhem with scooters literally all over the streets. So that's what they've done. So I saw that, I got excited about it, and actually 3 years ago decided I was getting out of there was a kind of a decision to be made about staying in Y-Evolution, that business, or getting out, or what we were going to do. Would we all sell the business? So it ended up that I sold my shares back to the shareholders because I got very, very excited about this space. And I was going to be one of those companies that actually did just put 500 bikes on the streets of Dublin. I was literally pressing the button to buy the bikes. And I said, look, actually, I'm going to wait here. And the thinking was, this could go horribly wrong. Or actually the thinking was, at the time was, actually, I think it's going to evolve into electric bikes. And I think some other clever dude is going to come along here. If I have all these bikes on the streets, some other dude is going to come along and put a load of electric bikes on the street, and it's going to kill my business. So I'll wait a little bit and kind of see what's happening. So I did. I kind of waited. I went to UCD and said, look, can I be an operator there? And in the meantime, what actually ended up happening was Dublin then put out a license for stationless bikes, and we applied and we won a license. So I didn't expect that to happen.
How many did they put out?
They have two operators, ourselves and another company called Bleeper Bike. So they're Bleeper Bike are the white bikes. So Bleeper Bike do have a fleet of kind of pedal bikes, and they've started to do really well actually this year, because fleet size is very important. So they started out with a small fleet, I think 100 or 200, and then they got to maybe 400. But this year they're up to about 700, and now you can see it. doing really well. They're getting a lot of good usage because they've got a big fleet in the city. And then so we've come along. We're number 2 now, and we decided electric was the way to go. So obviously the bikes are way more expensive than a pedal bike, but we won the license, and that was like last year we were kind of preferred applicant, so we kind of knew that we'd be winning it, so we kind of started going, oh right, and let's try and figure out what bikes to go with and what software. So we spent a good few months figuring that out, and then brought in bikes in November. The idea was that we would trial them on DCU, and we did that just to get used to everything. And then we were all set to launch those bikes in Dublin. 1st of April was the target, and we were about to do a big launch, and coronavirus obviously got in the way of that.
Yeah.
And
timing.
I think you know a bit about it. We did a kind of a what the hell are we going to do now kind of thing, because there's no people in the city. So we kind of looked around what was happening in the industry, and it was pretty obvious that actually bike sharing was booming in a lot of the markets. The reason being that a lot of people were turning towards bikes or electric bikes or whatever because of coronavirus and trying to avoid transport. Right. So at the time we were going into lockdown, and we figured that it would be a better idea to give them out to healthcare workers, because they were the ones that actually needed to avoid the public transport the most. So we did a campaign, and a lot of people donated towards it just to cover our operational kind of costs and insurance and things like that. But we gave out our fleet then to healthcare workers, and had to manage that, and do the battery swapping with them every day and things like that, and swap their bikes for them and things like that. But we get healthcare workers, and that was I suppose a good thing to do, and we got a bit of publicity out of it as well. And we had some bikes left over. And then in May, we put some of those on the street, literally just said, we might as well do something with them. So we put them on the street and started kind of piloting, I suppose, in Dublin, because we didn't want to launch until we had some kind of visibility on where coronavirus was going. So officially today, we're still piloting, although we have got up to about 90 or 100 bikes now on the street, because they've come back from the healthcare workers. So we've been operating. So we've gone from the 20 in May up to about 100 now. And it was a bit weird at the start. We were kind of, even though we'd done the trial in DCU, we weren't ready for a lot of what actually did happen when we started operating. And but all of that's been ironed out now, and it's pretty smooth. Bikes are, every day we have a couple of bikes have to come in to get fixed up, whether it's punctures or different issues, and then they have to go back out again. So right now we're very happy actually with the results of, on a revenue basis, how much we're generating. The key metric is how much per bike per day are you generating, and we are very happy with that because it's ahead of what we hoped in a non-coronavirus world. I'm not sure if we were under projecting or if maybe coronavirus has something to do with it, but we think we're in a very strong position for when the world does come back to normal. Like, we're missing tourists. A large part of our business should be tourists, and we're missing, of course, commuters in the city. Yeah. So despite that, we are ahead of where we hope to be. So that's very encouraging for when the fleet expands. So I think the fact that they're electric bikes maybe is what's happening. I don't think that maybe a part of it is that people are using the bikes instead of a bus or public transport, but our fleet is so small that it's hard to actually say that the reason is they're avoiding the bus, because you can't actually rely on our fleet to use instead of a bus every day, because it's too small
at the moment anyway.
Yeah,
fingers crossed. Tell me this, Thomas, just to kind of go back a little bit, you mentioned that you came out of college. What did you study? Because it sounds like you've got a good kind of design head for...
No, I actually studied business, but my strength would be kind of more marketing and product. I'm into
product. I mean, the first impression I get when you're talking about all these things that became like massive sellers and stuff is that you clearly have an eye to see
product. Yeah, no, that's what a lot of people will say. I have a really good eye for product, and then kind of putting everything around that together to make it marketable and that kind of thing. So that a product guy would be how I'm described.
and tell me this, I mean, a lot of our listeners are people that would be interested to sort of set up their own business, and just going back to the point where you suddenly got interested in what you saw in China. I mean, how do you go from thinking this is a great idea to, the next stage? Like, what was your next step when you saw that?
Well, I was in a I was in a different position because we had already got a company and it had profit and money and things like that. But I'd say like the next step, it was different for me. I was like, how the hell do I get out of that business so I can do this? But if it's somebody that just saw the thing and was like standing start, is that what you mean? More like?
Well, yeah, for example, your bikes, I think I asked you before we kind of started recording is, where do you get the bikes? Do you buy them all in China? Is it one supplier, or are you, because the bikes
Yeah,
have this yellow, they're very easily to spot, but I
yeah,
haven't noticed
yeah.
that
So
there's
look,
different.
there's obviously if you've got the money to buy them or you can give personal guarantees, that's important. That the hardest part of this business is actually the financing. It's very capital intensive. So traditionally, so all the big, like I said, those big companies in China raised billions, like literally billions in venture capital money. Same with the guys in Silicon Valley. And actually, what they were doing was that equity, that money, was being used to buy bikes, and that's wrong in a way. You should never be using equity for capital costs. It
Yeah.
should be debt really or asset finance. But nobody's doing asset finance for electric bikes or electric scooters, and I actually think that's a huge opportunity in the world. But that's another conversation. Yeah, so that's the hardest part. So equity is going into so they're raising money, a lot of money, and they're using that money to buy bikes and put them on the street. Maybe with the view that we've no other option, but it inflates your valuation, and then you have to really perform then after that. But buying a bike. So yeah, there's many different options. You can go to. There's many different options for sharing bikes. We actually went with our supplier because they were European based. They're from Prague, and we felt that we could trust them. Obviously I've had experience in China in the past, but I didn't want to dive in and spend a whole lot of money buying bikes from China with a supplier that I had no track record with. And that was probably the biggest deciding factor for us. Was these guys were kind of based in Europe, European contract. If there was a problem, they'll fly over to us, or we'll fly over to them. It'll be an hour flight. There's always problems with hardware, so that I knew that would be inevitable. So that was very important. I didn't want to be dealing with somebody halfway around the world. That was probably the biggest deciding factor about what to do. But there are plenty of options with electric bikes. There's probably a lot more coming on the market now. A lot of the big companies, they focused on scooters because that was the big hype, but there's a lot more bike options now arriving on the market as well. But you can go to get an agent in Hong Kong. You'll take you around 20 different Chinese factories tomorrow that can supply you with scooters and bikes. It's not hard.
Yeah. So there's plenty of choice out there. And in terms of what would you say is the most important step, the next step? Is it mapping out the strategy so you can talk to investors, or is it proof of concept? And what was your thinking in terms of the stages you need to go to kind of turn this into a real business?
We felt we needed to prove it. So we were about to raise equity funding even before, just before coronavirus as well. And but on the presentation at the time was, we think we can do this. So we were basing all that on evidence from other markets. So when an electric bike sharing scheme launches in London or in Paris or wherever, here's the metrics. They're typically 2 or 3 times more popular than the pedal bike scheme. So that means that we should be getting 10 rides a day, generating €2 or €3 per ride. That means our revenue can be X, and then our costs should be Y. But it was all based on
assumptions.
Yeah, assumptions. But I think they're valid assumptions and good assumptions, because you can just refer to other markets. So it was still a good story back then, but now it's probably easier because we have got them on the. It's real, and we actually are performing really well in a place probably where we don't have half our business is not there. So yeah, I think proving it is better, and then a lot of more investors will definitely jump at that point.
And so you've got it to this stage by bootstrapping it yourself, paying for everything yourself. You haven't got any angel investors involved. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's all been myself. Yeah, so I put in my own money and got. I managed to get a little bit of asset finance, but it was personal guarantees up against it as well.
Okay. The
So,
dreaded personal guarantee.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Ever since 2008, I never want to hear that word again. The
But
yeah.
now it's more believable. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's it. You've got hard evidence to kind of back it up, I guess, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
And like, just from looking back now at the last couple of months, are there any standout kind of moments that really kind of were pivotal in making the business? Assumptions you made, or learnings that you've had that kind of really
Oh yeah, look, it looks like a sexy business. It's got an app and everything, right? So it looks really sexy, and you can walk up to a scooter and rent it, or walk up to a bike and rent it and go. I suppose the daily grind is not, romantic vision of this type of business. You never think about the daily grind of customers, and people, bikes having to be fixed and things like that. So it's not so sexy when you're in it.
As it looks from the outside, yeah.
Yeah, it does. A lot of people think these businesses are cool and all that. But I never expected, like our software probably needs to be improved. Like we did have some issues with payments and things like that, but people, when you wake up in the morning and there's 2 emails of customers that have complained, it's quite disheartening, actually. I never had that in my last business because it was more of a B2B business. So I never had people going, oh, this, that, and the other, and this was wrong and that was wrong. But it's probably 2 out of 200 people. So it's like, you talk to other operators and they go, look, that's just part of the business. But it was disheartening.
Well, as we were saying earlier, the reality is that when somebody's had a great experience, they tend not to write to you to let you know. If they've had a bad one,
you just have to tell yourself that every day. So it's a mental thing every day to go, oh yeah. I wish the other 198 people who had a good time would write in as well.
Yeah,
but they don't.
Yeah. Well, it's important that people here understand that, because it can be pretty disheartening, and you got to kind of build a resilient mindset around all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's annoying. Bikes, physically having, buying parts and getting mechanics to fix them or fixing them yourself. There's a daily grind there all the time that just doesn't look like there is kind of.
And do you have a team built around you now, or
Yeah. We've got. I think we've got. I mean, the way the business works is you scale it with your fleet size. So depending on the amount of bikes you have, you need a certain amount of mechanics,
right?
A certain amount of customer service and guys going around swapping batteries. So.
But in terms of when you started the business, was it just you, or did you have a co-founder or any of that?
No, it was just me. And then I've given some small shares to some of the staff that I brought in as well.
And in terms of the technical side, so the software and stuff, is that something that you've developed yourself, or are you hiring in?
No, we hire. We rent it. It doesn't make sense to develop ourselves. You want to have a lot of, like, it would cost 300-400 grand to develop something like that. So it doesn't make sense for where we're at. We would rent it from other people. And the benefit you have there is that like people that specialize in software, they deal with hundreds of operators around the world. So everybody's asking for different features and new features. So you get the benefit of 100 people asking for things that will improve their business, versus, one guy kind of stuck in Dublin, thinking this is the right way to go. Software. But at a certain point, if we had a large fleet, just from a cost perspective, it probably makes more sense to develop in-house. In the future, but again, that's probably another year or 2 away at this point. But if we had 10,000 bikes, it would be silly to be paying €7 per bike per month when we could probably just develop the same thing in-house.
And tell us this then, the expansion, like Dublin is the current market. What's the plan then? Have you got kind of like a plan for the next 3 to 5 years? Is the intention to kind of go national or international? What's the next step for Moby?
I think like the way this space is working out at the moment is it's very much VC fueled, and I think and a lot of it, like, what's very important is lifetime of the vehicle. And scooters, everyone's got this hype about scooters because they all saw a lot of money poured into it, but they've all got problems now because scooters don't last very long. and they are also a little bit of a hype, so they do get used a lot straight away. So the hockey stick was there at the start, and VCs are putting in all the money, going, this is the future. But if you look at markets where they've been around now for a while, people tend not to use them because really they're only replacing walking. But I think what you're going to see down the line is that bikes will become more relevant. So I think but a lot of operators around the world are not profitable because they went with scooters. So I think what's important from what we're thinking of doing is getting to profitability very, very, very quickly in Ireland, and kind of really, the opportunity we have is actually because there is a license here in Dublin for only 2 operators, is that we can actually be profitable as a result. A lot of the time if you're going into Paris, you're up against 10 other people and everybody was fighting for the same revenue. I think there's going to be consolidation. I think there's a private equity roll-up strategy down the line. And I think what's important in order to get you ready for that would be to get profitable very, very quickly in one market, and then start looking at other markets where there's opportunities and maybe somebody wants to sell their business or whatever, and start doing a kind of a roll-up strategy that way. I think the idea of rocking into Bristol tomorrow and putting 500 bikes on the street without a permit, or trying to get a permit is probably not the way to go.
I've also seen one of the issues that, just talking about the difference between a bike, whether it's a pedal bike or electric bike, but the difference between them and a scooter is, first of all, the size of the wheels. I've seen a lot of guys out there on these little scooters, but if you hit a stone or something like that on a wheel that's, just small, and you go straight off it, whereas bicycle wheels will at least absorb a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, the form factor is wrong. They if you were to do it right, you'd probably really have to look at, if the law was to change in Ireland, it should change with somebody kind of looking at speccing the right vehicle as well. One very fundamental difference between a scooter and a bike is you can't indicate on a scooter, so you can't put your arm out. Tell the driver behind you that you're going right or left. So I think a vehicle that goes 25 kilometers an hour and you can press a button to do that, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that the current form factor is wrong, especially for Ireland. So I would think that if they are going to legalize it, they should really think it through and maybe get into the detail of what exact vehicle they're going to legalize here. And also, what I said about scooters, we probably still would apply for the license if it came up, and that's really to protect our own business. I'm not a believer in them long term, but I don't want at the same time somebody else being an operator.
Understand. Well, I speak to the occupiers here in East Point, and one of the things that we hear a lot of is that people are bringing their scooters into the office and bringing them up and putting them onto their desk and stuff. Whereas you don't have that problem with the bicycles. You leave them out. We have bicycle, racks, and we have sheds and stuff. And people will lock their bike out there, put a chain on it or whatever. But a scooter, they feel like they have to bring it into the office, and it's causing a problem with the management. They don't like to see these scooters lying around and stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah. I wonder why that is because they don't have a lock on them, probably. But, or it's just a mental thing, is it?
Well, I also think it's difficult to attach a lock to a scooter sometimes.
It is, yeah.
Because the way it's designed doesn't have too many, points of locking.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into we were talking about the different, applications that you can have, rather than it just being sitting out on the street. We were talking about dedicated subscription model where somebody like me who runs a business park can actually enter into a contract with you where you provide exclusive use for our occupiers to use bikes. Are there any other aspects of the business that you're kind of thinking outside the box?
There's lots of verticals. So a lot of people will say that the street scheme, so that's why I talk about scaling as well. So like a lot of these other companies, they kind of said, okay, we're going to scale and do this street scheme, what I call a street scheme, putting bikes on the street, hoping people will rent them or scooters. And they've just, that's one vertical of the space. And what they've done is try to do that in many cities all at one time. Whereas if you look at just doing one city and get into all the verticals, so the other way of looking at it is the street scheme is what legitimizes you in the city, and it's your kind of your marketing. But all the other verticals then are things like there's many dedicated schemes for employers, dedicated schemes for people like yourself who run large business parks, property developers who are developing new properties, They're all. I believe there's murmurings that it's going to become mandatory now that when you're trying to get planning permission for a new property, that you have to have some kind of shared mobility scheme or shared bike scheme even in your application. But property developers are okay with that. They actually like the idea because it helps them in a big way as well. There's the Deliveroo drivers who all need to get kind of rentals of bikes, so subscriptions to them. There's the general public. So there's a new kind of thing happening it's called the Netflix of bikes or electric bikes. Basically, you subscribe to a bike instead of owning one, and there's a whole lot of benefits to that business from a consumer perspective as well. So instead of having to fork out €2,000 or €3,000 to buy an electric bike that might get stolen and you're going to have lots of maintenance issues, you just subscribe to one. It arrives at your door. Anything goes wrong, it's swapped the next day. And generally, the cost of subscription should outweigh the cost of ownership when you add up all the costs. That's another vertical. We've been dipping our toes into that and into the Deliveroo business at the moment, and then we've had a lot of inquiries from employers as well who want to figure out how to do dedicated schemes for their staff when they start to return to the office as well. It's something that's quite common. So if you somebody like yourself or somebody who's developing a property or a large employer, basically anybody in your property or in your business park or in your company can basically, there's a set amount of bikes that we supply to you. Could be 20 bikes, could be 100 bikes. Those 100 bikes can be branded for your business or your development. And then you will, only people who you want to access those bikes will be able to access those bikes, and they'll be able to take them around the city to go to meetings. They'll be able to take them home to go to and from work, or they'll be able to take them to and from the DART station or the train station as well. So it's basically the main difference is that it's there all the time and it's reliable, and only your staff or whatever can access it.
So the big thing now is the final mile. It's, we've got the bus service, around the city, and the train service and all that. But a lot of people, it's the final journey, that final mile between the train station and the place. That's where it's difficult. And we have you
believe that the future of the world is like everyone's trying to get rid of the car and get around on public transport. So if you, in theory, believe that that's the future, the problem is you might own your own bike. Let's say you live out in Lucan and you have to go to, or Blanchardstown, you have to go to the station, then you have to leave your bike there, then you get on the train, and then when you get off, you've got nothing to connect you with that last mile. And that's where we come in, or should. So there isn't enough space, obviously, to carry. If everyone was going to move towards bikes and public transport, there's no space on buses and trains to carry these things around with them.
It's one of the things that I've heard recently. I mean, since COVID-19 struck, obviously, a lot of people have stopped taking public transport and they've moved to walking and taking bicycles. And I heard somebody talking about their business they sell bicycles. Their business has been up 500% this year.
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, it's that's not on 500% sounds a lot, but yeah, most people are up at least 300%. Yeah, in the bike business, consumers on the consumer side.
It's incredible. I mean, and the thing is it just goes to show that, every cloud has a silver lining. Like, somebody out there is making money on some aspect of COVID-19, whereas everyone else is out there furloughed staff and all that kind of stuff. Is there any, on your journey through here, are there any kind of lessons that you learned that really stood out to you as something that, I wish I'd known this? Well, you mentioned earlier that the glamorous side of the business doesn't outweigh the hard grind. But is there any other aspects, or is there any advice that you've received that stands out as that really made a big difference to me?
In this particular space?
Well, just generally. I mean, I talk about resilience and restraint and patience and discipline in business and things like that.
Business is hard. I mean, business is very, very hard, and no matter what way you picture it, it's never going to be that way. And it's far, far, far tougher than you think. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do is start your own business. So and you're going to have really good days, and then the next day is a really bad day. It's just part of being in business, and you have to be able to withstand that. And not a lot of people can, but no, it's
the resilience is super important, because I mean, there's this glamorous side to calling yourself an entrepreneur and to kind of say, oh, I'm a founder and stuff, and people kind of think, oh yeah, I want that, and the reality is not everyone is cut out for it.
The Mark Zuckerberg effect.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you read into all that kind of stuff, but they call it the Mark Zuckerberg effect. A lot of younger generation people believe that they're entitled to, equity and everything that when they walk in the door, because they could go out and start a business tomorrow because Mark Zuckerberg did it and he's in their face. When we were young, there was a rich guy in town, but he had worked his ass off and he was 60 years old, and everybody respected him. But today, Mark Zuckerberg is there in everybody's face, and he's 30. And
it's incredible. Like, the guy was a billionaire before he hit 30, and so there's this assumption that, oh yeah, that's what I'll do.
Yeah, and I should get equity for kind of showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's a big problem. The future of human resource managers are all really worried about it.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I can remember hearing a story when Facebook shares were being floated on the market, that they had at one stage, they wanted to paint their headquarter building, and they got a graffiti artist to come in and do this big kind of graffiti kind of wall mural or something like that. And they said, look, we've got no money to pay you, but we'll give you shares. And the guy said, yeah, okay, fair enough. And so when the IPO happened, I think the guy made 50 million off of that. Yeah, I mean, just because he was there and he decided to take equity instead, Yeah. Speaking of equity, we were going to talk about you're doing an equity crowdfunding thing now, and I'd just love to hear what your thoughts are on that, and how people find out more.
Because it's not been done in our space, but just to describe our space, when you've got a couple of operators who come into your city, I'll go back to Bristol. There could be 3 companies there, ourselves and 2 other guys, Lime or Bird, or it could be anybody. But generally in this space, there's no differentiator between the companies. Maybe you'll have downloaded somebody's app first because they landed there first. But in general, there's no brand, there's no loyalty to any company. There's no brand loyalty. It's very hard to differentiate. The hardware is more or less the same. People do try and differentiate with their hardware, but the following year, the next, if somebody comes out with some good hardware, or something, a better bike or a better scooter, then everybody will have that 6 months later anyway. So it's very, very hard. There's no moat, I suppose, and there's no way to lock people in. And nobody's done, to my knowledge anyway, nobody's done what we're about to do, which is what we're going to do is equity crowdfunding. And we could go and raise a lot of money from investors, private investors who want to put in 50,000, 100,000 each, or we could go to hundreds of investors and get €1,000 or €100 each, and those people are actually the people I call it the streets of Dublin, who would actually use our bike service. And I think that's a great way to get everybody involved. So if we could get 1,000 or 10,000 people investing €100, that's €1 million of equity that we've raised from our customers. They're now locked into, hey, I've invested in this company, so I'm going to use Moby versus Lime or Bird. They're also got to potentially talk about it and share. If we ask them to share it on Facebook and things like that, they then become brand ambassadors as well for the business. So I think it's a very valid strategy and probably the best strategy for this business. But I haven't seen anybody else doing it. And I kind of use the example of Cork. If we were going to go down to Cork next year, and even if we didn't need to raise any money to do that, or even after we did it, I still think it's a very good idea to open a tiny round, 10 grand, and just make it exclusive for the people of Cork, because they're actually now invested in their own electric bike share scheme, and they're going to use it more as a result and respect it more as a result. Maybe the example of seeing a broken bike lying on the street, one of my investors who's invested €100 might actually go and pick it up. That kind of thing. So I think that's a very good way to that's the strategy.
I mean, everyone's looking for a return on their money, because I just saw there today in the paper that the banks here are going to be charging you now to deposit your money and keep it in the bank. So your savings account is now costing you money, and so if you're able to give somebody back some sort of return, we had the founder of Property Bridges on a couple of weeks back, and he wanted to create a product that does peer-to-peer lending, so that small developers that can't really get finance from the banks would actually have an opportunity to build schemes here in Ireland. And he would and it's been successful, and he's able to raise money, and a lot of people are throwing in as little as €500 to kind of crowdfund basically loans out to developers and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think I think it does work, and it does give people kind of a brand loyalty kind of sense that, I own a share of these bikes all around,
Yeah. For sure. And we're able to do things like obviously our biggest problem, you've got professional investors. I actually, it's something I need to bring up with my advisor on Monday. But the biggest problem we might have, professional investors could invest 10 grand on the equity crowdfunding. They know that's kind of money that's put in there, and they'll get a return when Thomas sells the company or IPOs or whatever, But that could be 2 years, it could be 10 years. But a professional investor knows that. The biggest question I think we're going to get, and I need to figure out how to solve it, is potentially the average person who's investing €100 or €300. The first question is, when do I get my money back? And obviously, we're not a public company, so
getting your money back is difficult. Unless
what we are going to do is offer, it's pretty cool because we're going to be able to offer ride credits and a rebate as well. So the idea would be, if you invested €1,000 or €100 or €1,000, you get a 40% rebate on your EIS. But also, we could potentially then give you €200 or €300 worth of ride credits. So actually, you've got €1,000 worth of shares, and it's only cost you really €300. That's pretty cool as well. €300 is worth 1,000, and your 1,000 might be worth 10,000 in a few years' time. So.
And then you've got plans to expand internationally. Will you use the same way to fund that?
We will. I think obviously we'll get some professional investors in later, but I think I really like the idea of opening small rounds for every city we go into. Yeah. So.
And then the likes of the Enterprise Ireland here in Ireland, you've got these guys that are great sources of funds for startups and stuff like that. You haven't tapped them yet for anything. It's all
not yet. No, not yet. I have just sent in the application though. So.
Oh, okay. So watch this space.
Yeah. So they could potentially match fund the equity crowdfund. So yeah, I've just sent it in. We didn't. There was no urgency to raise money, so we weren't. It wasn't something that was I needed to do in a hurry. So it's been a slow
process
fundraise.
Yeah.
Because, the other thing I've looked on that peer-to-peer, and I think I mentioned it earlier in the asset finance. I had a conversation with somebody earlier, saying, well, why don't we set up an asset finance division / company where people could essentially, put in for let's just say easy numbers, 50 grand is 50 bikes. So somebody puts in 50 grand and they get 5% back interest, and it's repaid over 3 or 4 years. A bike is always resellable. It's actually not going to lose its value, because that bike, that €1,000 is worth €2,000 or €3,000 at retail. So even in 3 or 4 years' time, the bike is still worth €1,000. So you put in your 50 grand and you get 5% a year, and that then asset finances, let's say, our company or even other companies like us. So and they get financed by, we could put their name on the bike, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do for the world and all that kind of stuff. It's a good ethical investment, but it just doesn't exist, and it's frustrating that asset finance doesn't exist in this space. And I think it's a massive opportunity, because the bike business is worth 40 or 50 billion, and I think people are going to move towards shared bikes, subscription bikes, and things like that. And there's no asset finance around behind it.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I hear they're talking about Tesla cars and the fact that you could actually have your Tesla making money for you when you drive home, you get out of your car, and then the car goes out and auto drives, basically picking up fares.
Really?
Actually, yeah, they're talking about this kind of a fleet membership thing where you enroll your own car into the fleet, so it goes out and services, and it can actually become like an Uber driver. Obviously this is a few years away when driverless cars are a thing, but I can see, I've heard already that in, I think, the state of Nevada in the US, I think there are taxis there that have already done 75,000 miles of testing with passengers in the car. Now they have a driver who's there ready to take over if there's an issue, but the actual car has driven autonomously 75,000 miles now. So it does seem like this is becoming a reality for the future. And
I'd say 10 years still though, but yeah, at least 10 years before we'd see it here anyway. But,
yeah, I do think it's a while because people it takes time for people to get adjusted in their mindset and stuff. Tell us, Thomas, the equity crowdfunding, is that live or is that going live? Is that
it's going on Tuesday. What date is today?
Today's the 15th of October, so
yeah, Tuesday the 20th. It should be on Spark crowdfunding. They're like crowdfunding. The Irish kind of, there's Crowdcube in the UK and Cedars, but Spark crowdfunding is the Irish version of that.
Okay, well, I'll put a link in the description below. So if anyone wants to check that out, they can do that.
Yes.
Finishing up, Thomas, just was going to ask you, is there any books or any kind of resources that have stood out for you as being super helpful in your journey over the years? Does anything?
I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs. He's a product guy, but so I read all his books. So Richard Branson as well. A lot of his books. I can't tell you the names. They're just over here on the.
Like a virgin.
So yeah,
business biographies basically around specific iconic figures like Steve Jobs and Richard Branson.
Yeah, they've been what I read. Every Christmas when I go home, I take a few of those books and read them.
Yeah, one of my favorites growing up was reading about Howard Hughes, the
airplane
American
guy.
aviator. Yeah, and he was an aviator and a filmmaker, and then he got into all sorts of stuff. He got into airlines, and he was the owner of TWA, I think it was, and I mean, it's just incredible story.
Very eccentric fellow, wasn't he?
Super eccentric. He used to lock himself away for months and not seeing anybody because he was scared of germs. Funny nowadays that we're in this coronavirus situation, but he literally lived in this room, and his nails would grow like to kind of like 6 inches long, and his hair would grow down his back and everything. And then he'd suddenly like say, okay, I'm finished now. And he'd like shave and cut it all, and he'd be back out like a swashbuckling kind of entrepreneur, and just a bizarre guy, but a fascinating read for anyone who's interested in biography.
There's a movie. There's a movie about him, isn't there?
Yeah, it was Leonardo DiCaprio played him in Aviator. Yeah, but that only covered the rise of Howard Hughes. It didn't cover the fall of Howard Hughes.
Right.
And the fall of Howard Hughes is just as long as the rise. I mean, he became kind of a recluse around the age of 40, 45, but he actually went on into 76 when he died. So he spent 30 years as a recluse, and a billionaire recluse basically. And he would buy hotels. He would buy like the entire top floor. He'd buy an entire hotel so that he could stay in the hotel. And he would take the whole top floor for his staff and stuff.
Well, he didn't lose his fortune or whatever, did he? Or
no, when he died, he was one of the richest men in the world. In fact, he was the richest man in the world when he died. But nobody had seen him in 30 years. And he was flying around in a private jet, and like he had staff that would go into a hotel in advance, and they'd blank out the windows so that nobody could see him, and that no daylight could get into the bedroom and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, really fascinating story, but completely cuckoo, fascinating.
Well, he did it. He created a great company from nothing, was it?
Yeah, well, it was his father created a drill bit, and the original drill bit that oil companies use. He created that, and he did like basically a lease agreement, so that instead of buying the drill bit, you had to lease it from him. And so all these oil companies were paying a fortune for this, and it became a very powerful company. And he inherited it at the age of 16.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, as an only child.
You could get finance for drill bits.
Yeah, that's it. Thomas, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, or if you wanted to learn more, what's the best way to connect with you or to find you online?
Thomas at mobimove.com. Mobimove.com, yeah.
Mobimove.com is the website. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and Thomas at mobimove.com.
Great.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Gavin.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot, Thomas. Take it easy.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Thomas O'Connell of Moby Move. I've put a link to his website and to the Spark crowdfunding website that he mentions about his equity funding, crowdfunding that he's going to be doing this week. That's Spark crowdfunding. It's going to be in the show notes. I didn't see a link to it, to his actual campaign at the time of recording this, but I may drop in that link at a later stage. So depending on the time that you're listening to this podcast, you might find that there is a link below. So that's it, guys. That is it for episode 25. I can't believe I've actually made it to episode 25. When I started this thing out, the average of most podcasts, I think they say if you make it to episode 7, you're in the top 90% or something like that. So anyway, I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you have any suggestions, questions, topics you'd like me to cover, please, by all means, drop a note to me, either in the Facebook group, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Gavin J. Gallagher, and Twitter, and all of the various places. I'm across them all under the handle Gavin J. Gallagher. Thanks again for listening. If you have anything you would like to do for me, the one thing I would ask is that you please consider that review. And if not a review, at least share this podcast out with a friend that you think might find it valuable. But the review really helps with discovery and helps us get out there helping more people. If you would like to join the Facebook group again, that is Behind the Facade Community. I'm active in the group with videos, and I answer all of my members' questions. Whenever they drop a question, they always get a response from me, and often I'll turn it into an actual podcast. And lastly, if you want to find out more about me and all the various things like that, I strongly suggest that you sign up to my newsletter, which you will find by going to my website, gavinjgallagher.com/go. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. It's dragged out a bit longer than I expected, but we're back down doing the longer podcast. So hope you're enjoying it. Until next time, have a great week.